pass around that mic. Yeah. So this is the discussion portion of the BoF, Birds of a Feather. We're all hopefully programmability birds here right now, and we're interested in programmability. And there's questions we might have. There's maybe you have something to contribute also that you just want to bring up. But it's this open community idea. So I'll start off, and then other people can join in. But I'm wondering, what's it gonna take for people to adopt programmability? I know that a lot of times you say, well, what can it do? It can do anything. And people end up doing nothing because it's so open, because it's so undefined at times. What's it going to take to get people to go from the fixed function switches to the programmable ones?
Since I kept the microphone, and I'm also from vendors that makes programmable chips, maybe I'll start first. So I think it's a tough question. That's $1 million or $1 billion question, at least for us. And I think it's it's a combination of things. I think that the mental process of getting ready to take more risks to achieve, to get better results. This process happens, but also the commercial part needs to become more mature, right? And the commercial part it's a combination of the entire supply chain to be lined up to support this type of solutions. And this is something that in progress, and I think that explained, we were the first one to launch programmable solutions 3 years ago, 2015. And then Barefoot, they followed us, and we see now that Broadcom as a leader also takes this direction of more programmable solutions. So I think we are getting there. It will take some time, but eventually we will be there.
Sure. Yeah, that is $1 million question. I think a lot of times, at least what I see working with customers, is they get quite excited. Some of it is based on our marketing. And yeah, they tend to explore a lot of different use cases, but then they tend not to focus on one specific case. So I think sometimes some focus from people, at least in my job, I try to coach people and say, okay, let's pick the one that you want to go after that you cannot do with your current solutions, and try to do it. In terms of ecosystems, I think at least the OEMs and the SwitchOS partners that we work with, they're starting to look at, okay, so how can they give people programmability without having them actually write the entire P4 program. Right, so one partner that I haven't mentioned in my talk, but they have a demo in our booth called Noviflow. They're actually trying to do some of those things where the customer can do some changes to the pipeline, not the entire pipeline. Yes, the chip is capable to do that, but they're trying to sort of take a baby step to take it more to the masses.
I think that definitely, we have the use cases. There are use cases that need this kind of programmability. I mean, from the North perspective, like we need kind of API to expose that programmability so I can actually use it. And ideally, because we also have to deal with traditional applications. So we don't want to start from scratch. We want to add some new functionalities into the existing pipeline, and then be able to expose that programmability so we can use. Yeah.
Anybody in the audience want to chime in? You're a user, you're just a smart person. What are you thinking about how this can actually go from the lab into use?
So, I mean, just a comment, right? I think flexible ASICs are there. And then the very first flexible ASIC actually got shipped as a fixed function ASIC because of the use cases, right? That is 7, 8, 9 years ago, maybe, right? So, so I think it's very important to look at what are the use cases, right? And if the same use cases are going to change the ecosystem so much that you really have to churn everything, versus how do we take brownfield and then how do we move forward slowly? I think that will be the key. And then what will be key, again, I'm making statements, you can keep me honest on it, is how do we keep open formats, open table formats, open pipeline formats versus one hardware architecture specific way of programming or pipelines or tables, right? They'll be key, like SAI, I think you were saying it more clearly, that it need not be Mellanox centric, it could be SAI pipeline, right? So I think moving into common open pipelines, open table formats versus one vendor driven. Knowingly, unknowingly comes up bottom up, right? Somebody vendor has an ASIC, their language comes up as a reflection of their hardware architecture than really 5 or 6 hardware architecture. So I think that evolution will take time. I think having these multiple languages and multiple formats and the best will come out over a period of time. And I'm trying to be vendor agnostic. I can tell you my background, 21 years at Cisco, right now Broadcom, built P4 switches, built flexible switches, so we go between companies, but I think what will succeed would be the ecosystem.
Good job of being vendor neutral there. Nice answer.
Just to reiterate a point which everyone is making here, I think for the end user, it's very critical to have a easy way to manipulate the pipeline, and that needs to be exposed in the network operating system via some form of API or some kind of hooks. Now, the first question is when this is going to happen, to at least to limited extent, so we can start doing kind of funny things with the ASIC. And number two, how you guys gonna prevent the network operating system vendors to keep locking this down for the end user? Because this is the biggest question. I mean, we understand that it's gonna be limited functionality first, and that's good, baby steps. But then if I wanna create my own protocol and the vendor is preventing me from doing so, I mean, how are you gonna control that? Thank you.
So one way to go is to take Sonic, which is open, so no one can lock you. You can do whatever you like. And I think that there are operating systems I can give Onyx, which is Mellanox operating system, in which we are going to we support Docker container. On this Docker container, you can actually load the P4 program. You will be able, so it's not released yet, but this is the plan. You can load the P4 program, get the P4 auto-generated API out of it, and then run an application on top of it. So there are plans. I cannot speak from the other vendor, switch vendor in there.
So we embrace all these things.
So I guess this begs the question. I've been around too long, and everyone's trying to come up with standard APIs for stuff. So who drives this? Who in this section do you see driving the standardization? Do you see it vendors, or do you see it as users? I mean, that's the problem. When the vendors try, I mean, I've been around enough that vendors try, but then everyone, like, whatever X vendor is, and the Y vendors don't trust, so that doesn't work well. And if a user does it, then the user has to be big enough and buying enough to truly drive it. And then you have different users that want to do their own thing. So, I mean, the programmability is definitely something we need as an industry, but the standardization of an API or whatever platform so that you can get the different levels of users to program it, that's always been the challenge. And who really drives that? Do you see it users, or this comment, market share? So Sonic is more pervasive, so it'll probably influence it more versus these other ones. Maybe it's too small, but in the end, it's a user group that actually did it, and they just happen to get traction. And the vendors can try, but unless they get with the right users, I mean, just a question.
I think in the case of Sonic, it is the community, and I think when we talk about APIs that are standardized, it doesn't mean that they're all like always predefined and locked, right? So when you talk about SciFlex, right, it's auto-generated APIs, right?
So I think that the power of the SAI community is actually there is a mixture, because you cannot come from an end user to define such a standard, then it will be like not. It should be like a symbiosis of hardware vendor and end user and a system vendor sitting together in the room trying to figure out what the hardware can do, then one user want to see, and then coming up with the right pipeline or right standardization. And this is what we are trying to do in the SAI community, and I think we have the right ingredients. So we have end user, we have system vendor, we have protocol vendors, and we have hardware vendors sitting there. So hopefully we'll come up with something that actually can work.
Yeah, I just want to add that we started the site with common functionalities across the ASICs. Starting, we're collaborating a lot of ASIC vendors. We're driving, the Microsoft is driving the standardization of the site, as well as, right now the Sonic community is growing. I think we see a lot of Sonic partners that, there are a lot of talk on the telemetries, which is not yet a common functionalities across the ASICs. So I think we have started some of the conversations in the site communities because where users have that need to be able to want to use the same APIs to enable the telemetries across different ASICs and also to ensure the interoperabilities between the ASICs. I think we have some start some of the conversation, although we haven't put these programmable APIs into that context, but that may be, a starter for that kind of conversations.
And I think, so I think for Cavium and Expliant, there are two things. I think that a SAI that's a de facto already happened kind of a standard. So you see that there's enough operation system, not only Sonic, but also other operation systems that integrate ASICs. I mean, that's our layer with the network operation systems through SAI. That's already happened. And other initiatives, we just, we'll follow where the money is, right? So we see like, there's a Stratum with P4 runtime. If that's something that gains enough momentum and enough, market potential behind that, we'll do also this P4 runtime or any other APIs. This is how it works. We just follow the money.
So, Nirav, you talked about using eBPF as it was basically the programmable language. And I was wondering if Intel had any insights then into converting that into hardware-based, like the P4 is doing.
So P4 is going to be an option for sure for certain use cases, but for XTP-like use cases that we are working on, unless the BPF program itself is aware of what kind of pipeline or things that they care for, we don't see anything externally coming and programming the pipeline. For like today, there is no programmability at all. So first order problem is we want to solve that to give some kind of a choice for those kind of accelerated programs to allow to use the NICs on the systems, basically.
So it sounds like as far as the switching vendors go, we have the ASICs now that are fairly solid. And what we don't have is we don't have perhaps the first level of APIs that allow flexibility to be exploited. So what is it that the community needs to focus on? Well, we've talked a lot about SAI. Is that where the next level of development needs to go to get adoption?
So SAI is one option. It's not the only one. P4 runtime is another option. So it depends on the use case. So if you want the hybrid model in which you want your legacy software to work and some new stuff in a hybrid mode, probably SAI is SAI is the best candidate. Other application is the N-based application will probably benefit from P4 runtime more. So, and we as a vendor are doing both. So we are trying to support all the communities, the SDN community that want to innovate everything from scratch, and the SAI community that want to work with the hybrid mode. I think that there is room for both approaches, and both are good for the industry.
I think from our side, we see that I think there's enough communities or solutions that can be served as a starting point. And Sonic is one of them that can address a variety of use cases. And I think that what we want to see from a community is having all these operators and users coming in and actually taking serious steps into trying out this technology and deploying. And if certain use cases require additional APIs or additional functionality, We will, on the technical level, we will, as a community and as a silicon vendor, we'll work it out. We just need to see this drive of use cases and the path that, all these POCs and research ideas, it's actually, there is a path that it may convert into something real.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you said. So there probably, because of the programmability, there are a lot of different use cases, from traditional, like what the Sonic use cases, targeting versus, some of the use cases I mentioned, the packet brokers. The different use cases are requiring different kind of programming, whether they use existing switch pipeline at all, or completely using a different use case. I think different use case may drive different APIs. There may not be a one-size-fits-all solutions, for programming those chips.
I think I agree with the previous folks like Matti and Albert and Gohan. So if you're kind of using SAI and Sonic, definitely we're a proponent of making sure that to reflect the new programmable functions, there's some auto-generated SAI APIs, right? So that at least there's some ways that we don't have to go for a long process of discussions and agreeing on a proposal and make sure that it's upstreamed and all those things, because that clearly defeats the purpose of programmability. I think the community is pretty efficient. I wouldn't say that we're super slow, but still, right? When you're talking about programmability, things need to be a little bit faster, right? So, and clearly, if you have an operating system that's using SAI, you want to try to be using SAI all the way, right? Because if you start using like higher level API and then lower level API, because some things are programmable, that becomes a little bit harder from like software development standpoint, making sure there's no deadlocks and there's no information overwrite and things like that, right? And then P4 runtime, again, that's I guess different use case for more controller-driven type of applications, thin stack OS.
Other questions or comments or? Okay, last thing, I'll put you on the spot. Can you name specific deployments, and not just research or POC, but people who have really deployed programmability and what the features are that they are currently using in production? Customer names would be preferable, but if you can't.
Since we have 3 years of experience, I can probably go first. I think that the easiest example to bring is our OEM partners, Arista and Delphi. Arista, they did this algo match, which is a very unique trademarked technology by Arista based on them. And in general, all the OEMs that develop products based on our silicon, they implement their own pipelines, which are different from the standard pipelines. That's one type of solution. And the other type of solution, we have users that deploy white boxes, and that's driven by Gnosis and so on. But I think that some of the use cases that Arkady mentioned is probably relevant to us as well. But for white boxes, I can't really go and mention customer names, but we have also deployments as network packet brokers and these kind of things.
Yeah, I would say kind of similar. There's two kind of classes of customers that at least we have, right? Some of them is non-white box, which is OEMs. So OEMs definitely cannot be mentioned. You would see some names later on as they're bringing in solutions based on the programmable chips. Now, on the white box side, again, without mentioning customer names, I would say telemetry is in various stages of like pre-production qualifications right now in different customers. Other folks, mostly I would say doing kind of this table scaling and making sure that the pipeline is fungible. Packet brokers, I would say, slightly earlier thing where folks are starting with projects, definitely not in qualification yet. But just to give kind of a gamut of where things are, yeah. So I think because probably telemetry is the most broadly applicable use case. It applies to cloud customers, applies to service providers. I think Barefoot has done some of the initial announcement about telemetry with AT&T. It applies to enterprises. We've been focusing a lot on financial customers, right? Versus some of these other use cases, they're more kind of like target segment driven. So.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up there. Let's thank our panel one last time.
And maybe at behalf of, I think all of us, I really encourage all of you, the audience and your organization, feel free to reach out to us. If you don't know the name, you can get the names from Scott, and really we'll follow up with any interest that you may see in our offerings.
All right, thank you. And that concludes our engineering workshop. Hope you had a great summit, and we'll see you next year.